Let's explore whether or not there are side effects to meditation. This evening's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. How to deal with negative side effects of meditation. Now, it would appear that the person who crafted this question, for this individual, it would seem that English is their second or third language. So let us not be critical. Let us be accepting, and even be impressed with someone who can study meditation in a foreign language. Okay, Jared asked an excellent question, but I will have to come back to that later. So here we go. Actually, Jared asked an excellent question, so we're going to actually dovetail this question. So Jared asked, advice on being more independent and moving on from your past. Okay, we will touch on that. I've been meditating for a while now, and all of the time I do it feels like a war with my emotions. It feels like I'm constantly experiencing bad emotions for no apparent reason. So I highlighted the word constantly in red. We will come back to this. I see it as dealing with past trauma that has been unresolved. It's just that it's unending and I never get a break. Before, every time I meditated, I felt better and clearer. Now, I still feel those things, maybe even deeper, maybe even a deeper sense of them. And at the same time, when I finish meditation, it feels like I just battled with my emotions and rid myself of them. About a week ago, I had this very negative emotion where I thought that no one is real. I'm the only real thing and that life is not real, which I wouldn't say felt scary. It was some other emotion. And it was not just an emotion. It was also a different headspace wherein everything made sense. It's not that I was just having thoughts of these things. I knew in this existence, I was the center of it. And so let's touch on that for a moment. That is a very, very old impulse. As infants, each of us had that experience. We lay on our backs, unable to roll ourselves over, with a very small field of perception, a very small field of vision. And people would come into our field of vision and leave our field of vision, and they would lavish us with attention. They'd make silly faces and talk to us in soothing tunes, and maybe jiggle their keys. As we matured and acquired the ability to ambulate and to be able to adjust our field of vision, we learned in early childhood that we were not the center and that we were just part of a larger whole, part of a group. That group might have been called a family or a neighborhood or a class at school and the like. But that ancient feeling that we are at the center of it all is not unique. And some might even go so far as to describe it as one of many archetypical experiences. And we will touch on this. We will come back to it in a few minutes. It was an eye-opening experience, but it was also quite negative. Even while writing this, I'm having some flashbacks. And today, the whole day, I've been feeling that negative emotion all day long. It's not going away. So flashbacks typically refer to a traumatic event that is heretofore unresolved. So bear that in mind. We will come back to it in a few minutes. I do not want to meditate, but I think the only way to get past this is to face the fear, face the discomfort. But I'm having some thoughts that I'm maybe not ready. There's a part of us that will always find a reason not to move forward. I don't like the idea of giving it fancy terms and pretending it's a sentient entity. I don't think that's healthy. We have many survival mechanisms. One of many of those, is caution, sometimes hyper-caution or hyper-vigilance. It served our ancestors well, but it's useful to know that it's not omniscient, it's not always applicable all the time. Let's put a pin on that and come back to that. I also have other thoughts, that if I don't do it now, the feeling of dread might go away, but only hide and remain inside me, which I do not want to happen if I can deal with it now. Every time I had negative experiences while meditating, when I got past it, I always felt better. It's just I never dealt with this kind of thing where I think everything is fake. So I'm right there with you. I just want to take a moment. Now, my intention now is not to minimize what you're experiencing, but I do wish to comfort you and remind you that what you're experiencing is not unheard of. Now, it's not an indictment of you, but it is an indictment on the teachers and the books you might have been relying on. And once again, we will explore that deeper. Now, so welcome to the broad brushstrokes part of the Q&A period. So first things first. On one hand, we have active concentration and active contemplation. And on the other hand, we have passive mindfulness and passive meditation. And these two things are not the same. However, that doesn't stop people from telling people that mindfulness is active concentration and that meditation is active contemplation. But it doesn't make it so. If 47 men agree that 3 plus 3 is 27, that doesn't make them accurate. So I would like to explore this through the lens of hard science. We live in a wondrous age where we have functional magnetic resonance imaging machines, also known as fMRIs, where we can notice parts of the brain lighting up. And so now I am not a neuroscientist. I'm just someone with a shit ton of disabilities who had to rely upon other neuroscientists to dumb this stuff down for me. I just want to give you that caveat. There are some meditation teachers who speak about the sciences with more authority than they really ought. So I'm trying not to make that mistake. However, when we rely upon our medial prefrontal cortex to actively concentrate, and when we rely on our dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to actively contemplate, we can watch in real time as our blood collects and coalesces at this lumpy thing here, known as the amygdala, which functions as the seat of both aggression and anxiety, and is located at the bottom of our limbic system. So this can intensify our experiences of anxiety and aggression and undermine our resourcefulness and generally make things much, much worse. But here's some good news. When we replace active concentration for passive mindfulness, the type of passive mindfulness that is rooted in the sympathetic nervous system, and when we replace active contemplation with the passive meditation that is anchored to our parasympathetic nervous system, that blood mass can shift from our cranky and anxious amygdala over here, to this hunk of meat that looks like a catcher's mitt, to this hunk of meat that is known as the anterior cingulate gyrus, to this hunk of meat that functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, as the seat of empathy and compassion and love. I think it would be unkind if I did not elaborate, so let's do that right now. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we are accessing our sympathetic nervous system. No, it is not found in our brain, the 3-pound supercomputer between our ears. Instead, our sympathetic nervous system is found in the thoracic portion of our spinal cord, the part that correlates with our rib cage. No, this sympathetic nervous system did not evolve to support either extreme of mind blanking or active concentration. What then? What has our sympathetic nervous system evolved to support? Our sympathetic nervous system has evolved to notice, and to do so vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. As such, we are wired to notice all manner of things. We are wired to notice sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. We are also wired to notice emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. We can notice a whole range of phenomena, from the external to the internal, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the physical to the mental, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. Who we are is not determined by what we perceive, emote, intend, reason, recall, or imagine. Who we are is determined by what we do with what we experience. Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we are accessing our parasympathetic nervous system, ensconced within both the lower lumbar region as well as the tippy top of the cervical region, known specifically as the brainstem. This parasympathetic nervous system has evolved to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. Now, this is crucial. If we have not been taught this, then we won't know what to do with the perceptions, emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings that can assail our head like a fast-pitch baseball. However, something amazing can happen. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation could feel less permanent, could feel less defining, could feel even a teeny bit less solid. Now, this experience, like all experiences, is evanescent. It's ever-changing. So if someone says, man, my contemplative experience is always changing, I must be a failure. No, you're not. Ever-changing is good. It means you're not stuck in your medial prefrontal cortex. Instead, you are in your sympathetic nervous system and you're flowing. And that is ideal. It might not always be comfortable, but it is ideal. It has been said by one much wiser than myself that things in biology only make sense through the lens of evolution. So let's do that right now. Consider our distant, oh so very distant ancestors who've just ventured down from the jungle canopy and are beginning to explore the savannah. One guy we'll call Albert. Albert's discovered his first ladybug, and he's enthralled with the splendor of the sunlight reflecting off the hard shell of this beautiful creature. And he's so enamored with this beautiful sight that he's functionally deaf to the sound of an approaching predator, cruel and hungry and far too close. Consider now his pal, Bob. And Bob is a twitchy motherfucker. Bob's kind of like Deputy Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show. He's twitchy, and he's noticing everything. He's noticing sight, sound, sensations, flavors, scents, everything. Super fast. And the moment he hears what might be a predator, he does not stop to verify. He hauls ass. One of these two guys was eaten, and the other passed on his genetic material. We are the beneficiaries of twitchy Barney Fife-like Bobs. So, this mechanism that we call the sympathetic nervous system has served us well. Some scientists would refer to it as evolution's happy accident or fortunate accident. It is the teamwork of both our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. It was not only the key to our survival, but the key to us processing the pleasurable, the painful, the interesting, the boring, the glorious, and the grotesque. Let's talk about something ugly. Let's talk about victim blaming. Here's a riddle. I'm going to pose it to you. Tell me if you've heard this one before. What's the difference between an amateur and a professional? When an amateur makes a mistake, they say, oh shit, I fucked up. When a professional makes a mistake, they go, oh, interesting. Well, when a narcissist makes a mistake, they turn to the person who's suffering because of the mistake and they blame it on them. Isn't that crummy? Isn't that horrible? Isn't that crappy? Let's explore the yin and yang of it all. Those who tend to be rigid, those who tend to be controlling, emphasize concentration, active concentration and active contemplation, and they are quick for it to practice victim blaming. Sturgeon's law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. And this referred to the vast majority of meditation teachers and meditation students who are rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. And these are the people who are keen to practice victim blaming. Fortunately, there is a minority who are flexible, loving, rational, laid-back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind, especially flexible, loving, and laid-back. These people have the courage to be vulnerable, have the courage to not victim blame, and to help their students with great enthusiasm. An additional problem is this. Those same people tend to be rigid and controlling, will take a literalist view of illusion and emptiness, and they will pass this on to their students. A good communicator assumes full responsibility for the comprehension of his or her listeners. A bad communicator will accuse his audience of misunderstanding instead of accusing him or herself of poor communication. If your teacher sincerely possesses a literalist view of illusion and emptiness, or has just communicated a literalist view of illusion and emptiness, that will cause great confusion. That will sow the seeds of falling into the endless loop of wondering if that's real, or if that's real, or if I'm real, or if you're real. However, what if the whole idea of illusion and emptiness was always supposed to be figurative? Remember, in Buddhist mythology, it was said that Gautama, the Buddha, had a wicked cousin named Devadatta, who was the embodiment of all this yuckiness right here. Whereas the Buddha was the embodiment of all this groovy stuff right here. So someone who is flexible and laid back will have a different approach to the idea of illusion and emptiness. So let's play with that right now. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation could feel more illusory, could feel less real, could feel less graspable, could feel as non-graspable as a vast, could feel as non-graspable as a vast empty void. Now, any good English teacher will remind us that a simile is only as useful as it is relatable. What is a real-world example of a non-graspable vast empty void? How about the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although could be tantalizing to the eye, is rather intangible to the hand. And so when we view illusion and emptiness merely as figures of speech that are applied to poetically and creatively describe what is only a momentary experience, then we can feel less beleaguered, less beat up, less brutalized by these concepts. Remember, striving to label and define things is an act of rigidity, a symptom of our controlling tendencies. Setting aside the need to label is being more flexible. It's being more laid back. It paves the path to peace. Perhaps that is why, and the easiest way to practice mindfulness is to silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during each inhalation. The only label we need is simply this. Similarly, during our exhalation, we could silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease. Now, with ease, we're not lying to ourselves and saying, oh, look at me, I'm so laid back. No. This is not an affirmation. This is not wishful thinking. This is describing what is going on in the present moment in real time, because we can't exhale without automatically tapping in to this groovy parasympathetic nervous system. What I'd like to do with you for the remainder of this evening's live stream is alternate. Consider, if you will, the ponderous, slowly swinging pendulum of a grandfather clock. I'd like to swing back and forth with you between passive contemplation and gentle meditation. And I think you will find that all manner of stuff will come up, but it could be far less traumatic. Now, that doesn't mean that occasionally difficult things won't come up. One of my big jokes is the benefit of this practice is that it heightens mindfulness. But there's also bad news. And the bad news is it heightens mindfulness. So we will notice the full spectrum of perception, emotion, intention, thought, memory, and imagining. Everything from the glorious to the grotesque, from the interesting to the boring, from the pleasurable to the painful. Now, there will be times when troubling thoughts arise. I think it was Friday night or Thursday night. I was reliving experiences, painful experiences from high school, from things that happened in the early 80s. That's right, kids, when the crust of the earth was still cooling. And like everything else in this world around us, that pain I experienced was temporary. With the changing of the seasons, we see the impermanence of a year. With the waxing and the waning of the moon, we see the impermanence of a month. With the rising and the setting of the sun, we see the impermanence of a day. And right now, you could gingerly rest your fingertips upon your upper chest. As you breathe in, you could feel it swell. As you breathe out, you could feel it sink. And viscerally experience the impermanence of a single round of breath. Ever-changing, one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp. In the moment, we might experience something with an insane degree of intensity. We don't fight it. We don't shove at it. We don't argue with it. We notice it with the utmost of vulnerability, which takes great courage. But we also remember to breathe out. We don't force the breathing, but we notice the breathing. See, we're not practicing concentration. We're not concentrating upon our breath. How then do we relate to our breath? We relate to our breath the way a piano student of yore would deal with a metronome. When we notice our body breathing in, we notice. When we feel our body breathing out, we relax, if only just an incy-weensy teeny bit. So the folly of humanity is that we squander our lives in resistance to the present moment. The gift of enlightenment is in accepting the present moment, be it pleasurable, painful, interesting, boring, glorious, or grotesque. As I mentioned previously, there is a part of us that evolved to be hyper-vigilant. If we look for a reason to quit, we will always find it. How do we know what to do? Well, here's a really cool thing, which I'll tell you once I find my visual aid. Consider, if you will, this piece of art. This gal here, the color of a cumulus cloud, appears to be actively sporting a tantric union, thus reminding us that that contrivance is trumped by spontaneity. However, When we consider her partner, the color of the azure sky, who appears to be passively savoring the same tantric union, we are reminded that there are more than one flavor, or that there is more than one flavor of spontaneity. And that the scattered spontaneity we might experience during perhaps our third consecutive espresso will always be trumped by the centered spontaneity that is the byproduct of regularly training in inhalation and exhalation for as little as 5 minutes every 12 hours or so. In fact, the more that our choices and our utterances and our deeds flow with the effortless effort of love's centered spontaneity, the more blissful our life could be, the more our life could be as blissful as the real or imagined paradise or pure land or vati, if you prefer Sanskrit, of a real or imagined Buddha. Now, doesn't that mean everything's going to be bliss all the time? No, we're going to experience the full spectrum of emotion. But over time, the more we flow effortlessly from this centered spontaneity, the more we will know whether it's time to stop or persist, whether it's time to act or to rest. So we've already covered that not all meditation teachers are created equal. So now the time has come for us to turn our attention to the fine details and stop talking, stop listening, stop lecturing, and start practicing. And I'd like to do that with you after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. Now, I want to make sure that I touched upon Jared's question. So, advice of being more independent and moving on from your past. Well, I hope this explained that Jared, that the more we cultivate the centered spontaneity that is the byproduct of our regular practice of mindfulness and meditation, the more we will be able to surf the present moment. However, we still live in an interdependent universe where things and beings and phenomena are affected by other things and affect other things. Sometimes overtly, sometimes subtly, sometimes immediately, sometimes eventually, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, sometimes actually, other times just potentially. So, because our existence is dependent upon an infinite number of variables, there is no literal independence. You and I are dependent upon air, and nitrogen, and methane, and barometric pressure, without which we would die. We're dependent upon water. We're dependent upon food. We're dependent upon sunshine. We're dependent upon weather. We're dependent upon the choices of political leaders. We're dependent upon our friends, our enemies, our strangers, our neighbors, our family members, our co-workers. Everyone is affected by everyone and affects everyone. So literal independence is an impossibility. However, the more we flow from the centered spontaneity generated by mindfulness meditation, the more we will flow towards a more healthy and well-adjusted life. All right, Cowabunga. See, this is page 3. That should be page 3. Excellent. All right, let us bring the 4 bases of mindfulness, the circumstantial, the physical, the interpersonal, and the mental, into the path of loving kindness. Now, there's a very good chance that the display has lost its mind, so I will attempt to remedy that. Please chant with me. Since we are not alone in our mental frustrations, we could also long that others' mental needs also be met. As we breathe in, let us silently and mentally recite the adjective wise. And during the exhalation, let us silently and mentally recite all. So it's kind of like, a friend has come over for lunch and we are sticking our ladle in the pot and pulling out and pouring lentils into their bowl. Likewise, it's like we're picking up wisdom and throwing it to others, like a great celestial Oprah. You get wisdom, and you get wisdom. Everybody gets wisdom. Now, this is not supposed to be magic or active visualization or belief. We're simply reciting words, silently, mentally, and passively, in harmony with our inhalation and exhalation. And that simple thing alone is enough to exercise the neural pathways responsible for empathy. So what I'd like to do is practice this exercise with you for 4 rounds, assuming a round is simply 1 inhalation followed by 1 exhalation. And so here's what I'd like to do. During the inhalation, I'd like to advance the tip of my left thumb until it comes to rest upon the first set of creases of my left little finger, and then the second set of creases, and then the third set of creases, and then the tip. And in other exercises, we will repeat this process on our ring finger and middle finger and index finger. So as we silently and mentally recite wise all, you're welcome to follow along with my finger and my thumb if you so desire. Please chant with me. Since we are not alone in our interpersonal frustrations, we could also long that others' interpersonal needs also be met. So this time we're wishing that all beings everywhere experience loving relationships. Be those relationships vocational, recreational, platonic, or intimate. Please chant. Since we are not alone in our physical frustrations, we could also long that others' physical needs also be met. As we breathe in, we could silently and mentally recite health. As we exhale, we can silently and mentally recite all the inferences that we are wishing that all beings everywhere, real or imagined, enjoy wonderful health. Please chant with me. Since we are not alone in our circumstantial frustrations, we could also long that other circumstantial needs also be met. So, we're using the word boon as a one-syllable synonym for good fortune. Let's see, this is page 12. Okay, here we go. Please chant with me. Oh, I can take it back. Let us bring the 4 bases of mindfulness into the path of impermanence. Observing the coming and going of circumstantial phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. And so we are using lots as a one-syllable word for the circumstances, and we're using the verb melt as a metaphor of change, of impermanence. Observing the coming and going of physical phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Forms is a one-syllable synonym for body. Together. Observing the coming and going of interpersonal phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. So feels would describe our experience of the interpersonal. Observing the coming and going of mental phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. One moment. And just as we explored during the opening lesson, as we inhaled, we could silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this. As we exhaled, we could silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb is. By the way, so far we have explored counting 16 rounds upon the fingers of our left hand. And that's great. On our right hand, we can count sets of 16. One set of 16, two sets of 16, three sets of 16, and the like. Now let us count approximately 7 sets of 16 rounds. So I said 7 sets of 16. I misspoke. I should have said 14 sets. Excuse me. Allow me to remind you that every time we breathe in, we are wired to generate a vertical traction between our tush and our head. And every time we exhale, we are wired to release that. You don't have to force it. It's an automatic process. But by being aware it's there, we can cease to oppose it, cease to resist it, and simply allow it. Jared asked a very good question. I'm curious if meditation could work like a shield of sorts to protect you from harm. That's an excellent question. When one looks at the story of the Christ, one sees that he was executed. When one reads the story of the Buddha, one reads that there were multiple assassination attempts made upon him until finally one succeeded, and he died due to the act, due to being poisoned. When we look at the life story attributed to the Buddha, we see that sometimes he was healthy and sometimes he was sick. That sometimes he was treated kindly by his companions and sometimes not. He spent one rainy season retreat by himself in the forest with just one or two attendants because he was rejected by one of his monasteries. We see that sometimes people told the truth about the Buddha and sometimes people lied about the Buddha. We see that sometimes the Buddha was healthy, sometimes he was sick, sometimes he was alive, and sometimes he died. So anybody can be happy when life is going their way. When their thoughts are exactly the way they want them to, when their relationships are exactly the way they want them to be, when their body is exactly the way they want it to be, and when their circumstance is exactly the way they want them to be. What separates the men from the boys, what separates the women from the girls, is not if they can be happy when they have everything the way they want it. The test of our training, our meditation training, is how much peace and joy and love can we muster when things aren't going the way we want them to. When we are perceiving or emoting or intending or reasoning or recalling or imagining painful things. When our relationships aren't the way we want them to be, when our circumstances aren't the way we want them to be, when our bodies aren't the way we want them to be, can we still be perceptive and vulnerable and passive and visceral? Can we still release and relax? Can we still find a modicum of peace and joy and love in the midst of all that, even when our life feels like a 3-ring shit show? In the numerical discourses of the Buddha, in the section on the 11s, we are told that there are many blessings that come from training in loving kindness. However, if we train in loving kindness in hopes of pushing away the yucky stuff and pulling to us the yummy stuff, then we have missed the point. If we train in love, loving kindness, because we cannot do otherwise, because it is an effortless response to training in mindfulness and meditation, then we are on the right path. Now, it looks like I need to check on something real quick. Let's see how that turned out. Okay. There we go. And so Jared wrote, I used to get frustrated easily, and the characters of Anakin and Kylo Ren reminded me of myself when I was in those situations. I view them as cautionary tales. Well said, Jared. Well said. Here's a quote I came up with. I don't want anything because I already have everything. I respect your intention. May I recommend that it's okay to be honest? There will be times when we crave things. There will be times when we crave the presence of things. There will be times when we crave the absence of things. Let us not try to convince ourselves of something that isn't 100% accurate. The problem is not what we crave and when we crave it. The question is, what do we do with our cravings? Do we exercise the courage to notice them? Vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. And during our exhalation, can we relax into them, even when doing so feels perhaps a trifle uncomfortable? Okay, let's see here. Let's tap this button. Well said, Jared. Well said. Let us seal this evening's practice by percussively chanting loving wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. May all minds clear yet impermanent be as enlightened as a Buddha's mind. May all experiences of the interpersonal resounding yet impermanent be as loving as a Buddha's speech. May all bodies sensual yet impermanent be as beautifully healthy as a real or imagined Deva's form. May all circumstances appearing yet impermanent be as safe and abundant as a real or imagined Devi's land. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this